Hello and welcome to the Seren Stay-at-Home Series archive. Our first video features Robert Minhinnick in conversation with Jon Gower about his latest novel, Nia. We hope you enjoy watching it back.
At the back of this very fine book of Robert Minhinnick's, it says that he is one of Wales's, some would say Britain's, most eminent writers. And if we look at the little bookshelf marked Robert Minhinnick, it is full of some of the best essays, some very fine prize-winning poems, and now, of course, a trilogy of novels. But the way that I would actually explain how I hold him in esteem is simply this. When I decided to change the direction of my life and mainly concentrate on writing, the first books I reread were Robert's essays. Because I thought if I would go back to reading Robert's essays, I would learn a lot about how to see the world with all alertness, to use the enormous majesty and resource of the English language. With just that little thing, I actually think that Robert is an extraordinary writer, and we're lucky to have him in our number in Wales. Nia is the third part of a trilogy, which is set in Porthcawl, and like many fine writers, Robert has commandeered the town and its hinterland and the dune system and the fairgrounds and all the rest of it, and made that place his own. Like Anthony Trollope with Barchester, or Proust with Paris, or Joyce with Dublin, Robert Minhinnick has actually claimed Porthcawl. He's put a big stake down and said, this is my turf, and no other writer gets to write about it. Well, largely. So, Robert, do you want to just tell us a little bit about the other two books, about Sea Holly and Limestone Man? And if you take us back to Sea Holly, what was it about this collection of people in Porthcawl that made you begin to think, oh, I want to stay with them more than just a book's worth?
Well, it was generally the fairground. I wanted to write about the fairground, which, if you could see over my left shoulder, is about 300 yards away, in lockdown at the moment. But the fairground is a very powerful image in my life. It's a metaphor of all varieties in this trilogy of novels. It's a big part of my writing. It just happens to be 300 yards away, and it's a form of delirium, which I really enjoy. It's a form of madness. In winter, it's lockdown. In summer, it's not lockdown. It's crazy. And what's great about it is now my grandchildren love it. And I began to live by myself before I had grandchildren, but now they love it, so I feel vindicated.
And what was the first fairground ride you ever actually did?
I could not remember that job. I remember applying for a job in the fairground and failing the interview when I was about 18 or 19. How you fail an interview for a job in the fairground, I don't know, but I failed it.
How do you conduct an interview in the first place is what I want to know.
Indeed. Well, I just must have looked a bit shifty.
I thought you had to look shifty to be on the rides in the fairground. Anyway, Nia, as the name proclaims, the eponymous heroine, Nia, runs a shop in Porthcawl, and that's not dissimilar to the shop that you run in the town.
Yes, Nia's shop, Nia and Sky's shop, is extraordinary. The shop that Margaret Minhinnick, who is here in the room with me at the moment, and
who's your technical manager? Your technical manager, yes.
She's my technical manager, and she's very welcome as well. And also a lot of other group of people in Sustainable Wales run is called SUST. It's the it's not the technical arm, it's commercial arm of the charity Sustainable Wales, and it's the arm that brings in the money at the moment. It's the only place that we can get any money from, and we're making face masks and selling flour, and it's walking out of the shop at the moment. So we're doing very well, thank you.
Okay. So lest we think that what you've done is actually written a modern equivalent to Dickens's Old Curiosity Shop, it's not about the shop, because it's really about Nia's mental life and her dreamscapes. And it takes us out into some of the other parts of Porthcawl, which you've written about in the past. And it seems to me that out of all of the bits of the area, yes, the fairground is important, the marina, the promenade is important, but it's the dune system that really seems to commandeer your poetic muscle, if you like, because that sense of things drifting in and out, things being buried, things being revealed, certainly is a feature of this book.
I think that's right. The dunes obviously is made from moving sand. What's wonderful about sand is it conceals and then reveals. But what sand reveals is not always what sand conceals, and the other way around. Dunes are fantastic places for the flora and fauna, but also for the shape of them, how easily they change, and that they can change from one week's walk to another. And that's why I love walking over the dunes in any season, because they're always changing, a little bit like the sea.
So in the book, it actually tells us that if we were to go to the dunes now, we would see orchids and so on. And because Seren is recording this this conversation, I'm going to share with you my dune story, just because it's my sort of sense of devilment. Some years ago, I took a gathering of botanists, some twittering old ladies, to look for bee orchids in the dune system at Pembrey Burrows, which is one of the best places in Wales for orchids. And we went up one of the dunes and looked down the other side, and the ladies were ahead of me, and they went completely quiet because of the shock. Because in the dune slack was a man with his trousers and pants around his knees, sodomizing a whippet. I'm just putting that on the record, seeing as we're recording now.
Oh, right. Okay. Well, Seren will do a lot with that, I'm sure.
Yeah. Anyway, moving deftly on. I said that the book is
a whippet. Sorry. Oh, don't we? All right.
It ran away in the general direction from Seren and ran faster. I think the man ran faster than the dog because of the embarrassment. Anyway, we're moving deftly on now. I said it's about Nia's mental world, her dream world. And I suppose the best way we can actually invoke that is for you to give us a reading. And the first reading is about her dreams, sometimes daydreams, and it includes the one thing I am most scared of in the world, and that is snakes.
Okay. Nia was looking into the fire. Black panther skins, that's what she saw. In broken sleep while her daughter sang to herself, while the child murmured through the hours before dawn and the shadow of the moon and stars mobile played over her bed, she dreamed of snakes, the bodies of black vipers. These had been brought out by the weeks of hot weather. So much had been encouraged into the open. Adders and orchids unseen for years. Orchid blood on the chalk. Adders dark in her delirium. Her waking dream was of vipers. Two fighting snakes were wrapped around one another. Two black vipers with tracings of diamonds on their backs. Black diamonds on black snakes. Intent and vicious, those vipers.
We travel with her into the world of the mind and the world of her imagining and her dreams. She is often meeting people who've seen the world, who've travelled a lot. The book isn't just set in Porthcawl. It ranges quite far. We go to Auschwitz in Poland, we go to Amsterdam, we go to Saskatchewan. It's a wide-ranging book, which also takes us to New York. But she hasn't travelled as well and as far. And is she therefore envious of some of these other people?
She seems so. The characters she walks with and goes into the cave system with international travelers. They tell travelers' tales. Nia feels her tales are not travelers' tales. They're very much stay-at-home tales. But I would have thought that her tales, her travelers' stories about the dunes are as vivid and as expansive as their tales of India or Saskatchewan.
Because she knows this dune system really well. She understands how the water gathers, how some of the little lakes are formed and stay there temporarily for a brief while. She knows where the orchids are. Things happen in the dunes. So she knows this square mile, a filltir sgwâr, this mental concept, which is very important in the Welsh imagination. So there's a detailed world, but there's another detailed world that she loves to access, which is the world of limestone caverns as a caver. And that, if you like, is I'm not saying the hollow heart, because that would make it sound like an unemotional book, but that's the carved out heart of the book, really, where you take the reader into this world of caverns and cavernousness.
Yes. The Swill cave system, which is outlined and described in Nia, is based on another cave system called Swill, but spelt in a different way, which has been explored slightly, but is thought to extend on and off from South Wales, from the coast of South Wales to the Brecon Beacons, and is probably described as probably the biggest cave system south of Yorkshire. And it also contains the Great Spring of Glamorgan, which is the largest spring called Swill in Wales, and is bigger than the springs in Cheddar Gorge, and should be more famous than it is.
Because the thing is, I mean, we do have these cave systems, and people can go to near Abercrave and go to Dan yr Ogof caves as a series of show caves. But then the other side of the valley, which is also riddled and carved out by water running through limestone, has got a much, much bigger system. And as you suggested, it actually goes to the sea. And it's full of old stuff, not just old creatures like the transparent shrimp that you mentioned, but also there were other creatures there in the past, mammoths and wolves and bears and so on.
Yeah, well, I touch on that in my description in Nia of the description that comes through from the other characters of this cave system, which is a real cave system, but based on an imaginary cave system, which is thought to exist because it hasn't been totally explored. That's a wonderful thing about the Swill, in that we know it's there, we know the entrance, but we don't know the exit, and we don't know how far it extends itself. I mean, it could be 50 miles, it could be 60 miles, but it might be impassable. And when I first began to learn about this place, I wanted to write about it. And because one of the entrances might exist in the dunes just beyond the fairground, I set a lot of this novel in the fairground and then in the dune system, because they're so local to Nia's life.
When you launched the book I think you launched it in Porthcawl, didn't you?
Yeah.
You switched off all the lights for one of the readings because there's a very atmospheric journey into the dark, into the pitch black of the cave. Maybe, even though the lights are still on, maybe we can just close our eyes as Robert reads the next bit and be taken into this enormous cave system.
Okay, well, we can't turn off the lights. It's still pretty much daylight outside, and in my attic it's daylight, but this is what it is. Nia switched the torch back on. Every one of her pockets was stuffed with batteries. She had begun to check her zips, caressing herself for reassurance that the batteries were still there. But that didn't mean the batteries would work, did it? Each battery she carried had been tested the previous day. Yet dread accompanied her from the first step after the gate across the stream bed that was the entrance. There was not a drop in that stream now. Even the mud was dry. This happened near New. Sinkholes in the limestone might appear and swallow whole rivers, gone as if by evaporation. She switched off the torch. What she saw was stained glass, each fragment distinct yet black. It was so dark that Nia thought she could see better with eyes closed. The more tightly she shut her eyes, the happier she felt. The Milky Way of her mind, red giants like Betelgeuse swimming before her, galaxies that were spider webs. But there were spiders here in the swill. There must be. And she switched the torch back on. Bats in the cave? There were motes in the beam, spots before her eyes. She switched off the torch, then on, then off. The darkness was electric. She thought about what they were saying, the first words uttered ever in this place. Dripping of lime water, rise and fall of levels in the lime water sumps, sounds never heard before, no ear was present to hear, thunderstones for the stone deaf. No, all sounds were suffocated now. Then on, then off. Only touch. Now touch was all. Cold the cave, its darkness something she could taste. An oil of darkness, she could roll it round in her mouth like a marble. Her nipple in her child's mouth.
That's a beautiful reading, Robert. And there was something incantatory about the way you read it. And in fact, there are many passages in the book where you would have to say it's poetic prose. I think in some of the parts of the novel, you do actually take things that started life as poems and actually present them as prose.
Yes, especially in the sections where Skye relates what she was doing in Saskatoon and Saskatchewan. And I sometimes published poems about incidents in Saskatchewan or Saskatoon. And sometimes I kept the poems and didn't publish them. So then when I came to think about Skye's life, I took these poems, turned them into poetry, wrote them out as prose, and they appear in the novel.
So you are obviously a man who is a firm advocate of recycling, and it applies to poems from Saskatoon just as much as anything else.
Oh, indeed. I always believe in recycling, and it's like music. Music gets recycled forever. Tunes get recycled, words get recycled.
Obviously, there's a bar in Saskatoon, and I think that's modelled pretty much on a real bar that you used to frequent when you went out there. And there are bars in Amsterdam, but the one that I'm struck by in the book is the bar in Porthcawl, because until the Vulcan pub in Merthyr Tydfil won the title, the roughest pub in Wales used to be in in the shadow of the roller coaster in Coney Island, the fourth call. Was it called the Buccaneer?
Are you talking about the Buccaneer? Yes, well, indeed, that was a fairly interesting place to walk into. And I remember a memorable occasion when I walked in there once with the poet Ewan Floyd. And, but I think I have to regretfully inform you that it's been smoothed out a bit. They've taken off some of the rough edges. It used to be quite rough, no longer so rough, but they've tried to make it more amenable to people who
are human beings. They've tried to make it amenable to human beings.
It's no longer scary. And the last poet I took in there was Clear Gwyn, who came down for a walk in the dunes, and he told me that experiencing Port Cowl was a great moment for him, because the fun fairs that he knew in North Wales were all populated by what he described as English people from Manchester and Liverpool. Port Cowl was populated by people he thought were from the valleys, and he thought they were Welsh, and he described them as Welsh, and I would do the same, I suppose.
Well, it's in keeping that, people from the valleys filled the caravan site at Treco Bay.
Yeah.
There was the miners' fortnight. I think the last Wimpy bar in Wales pretty much held out in Treco Bay.
It's still there. It's still there, John.
So there are those aspects of things. So in this book, you're charting those changes, the way in which the Buccaneer tries to change its aspect, because all of a sudden they're now tapas bars on the front and all the rest of it. So there is that sense of change in the town as well, which is registered in this book.
Oh yeah. Well, what's important in the three books, the trilogy, is the weather, and the weather dominates each novel. And
it's a lovely hot, balmy summer in Nia.
Yeah, it's an extraordinary summer. I think we had one 2 years ago when it just never rained. And that allowed these three cave explorers to go into the swill and find out what was down that cave system. But also they liked and enjoyed walking around the dunes, camping out, telling each other stories, and just experiencing what the sunlight, strong sunlight, can do for Wales, because we're so unused to it. It can bring out some extraordinary deliriums that we don't always know exist.
There was one thing that I was struck by in the book, and I've been struck by it in all of your writing. This extraordinary vocabulary you have at your disposal. And there are writers, you can think of someone like Anthony Burgess, who would actually fill every page with 5 or 6 words that you didn't know, and you used to think, oh, come off it, Anthony Burgess. You're just putting it on and being pretentious. But you just choose the right word every time. I was going through it and thinking, what is it about Robert that makes him so alert to language? And it's like being a Swiss precision watchmaker. You just slot the right word in. Do you go around scribbling down words, or do you find the words from the locations? Because obviously there is a language of limestone caverns, there is a language of climbing, there is a language of dunes. And at the end of the book, you do actually tell us a little bit about the etymology of things like Bryony, which was an alternative name that Nia herself might have had. And we hear the history of the plant. So are you someone who just squirrels down lots of words, and you're raring to go to use them?
Well, like you, John, I love words. I use words. They're my raw material. I don't write them down, but I remember them. I read a lot, like you read a lot. And words, especially concrete nouns, which might be unusual concrete nouns, stick out for me. And I don't write them down, but I try to remember them. And I think all writers or poets should do that. And they should always have an appetite for words, unusual words, or words they haven't come across before. And that's what I do, I think. But I don't think it's unique to myself. I would imagine all writers do that, all poets, all people who want to write novels would do the same thing.
But I would actually say it's a particular delight when it comes to reading your work, because you are very good at it. There's a lovely aspect of what you do, which is that you're a sort of archaeologist, so that there are always layers. There are palimpsests of things, and just as the dunes commandeer things, so that in Nia there's a nunnery buried somewhere, and part of the story is to go and disinter that. And you yourself, I remember you wrote this lovely essay once about, I think it was a cholera hospital, and the remaining wall of it is outside Sainsbury's near Bridgend. But I hadn't realised that some of these things actually are part of your life, because you were in one of those hospitals, weren't you?
Yeah, I think the cholera hospital you're talking about is not a cholera hospital, an isolation ward, an isolation hospital called Kevin Heergoid, which has become Sainsbury. It's actually called an abomination. Its name was changed to the Pines, but the Pines will never be Kevin Heergoid. But that existed. It was an isolation hospital, and when there was an epidemic, where we've heard that word before, of meningitis in South Wales, about when I was about 9 or 10, I had to go to Kevin Heergoid, and I only saw my parents from behind glass. I'm sure there are many memories now that are coming through from people who are marooned behind glass. But that happened then, and I had meningitis, and I'm glad to say I got over it.
So when I sort of got in touch with you this morning, we just sort of quickly exchanged ideas about this evening. You were telling me that there were some things that are themes that have been dropped in the book. There was more in this book about sort of care homes and things that were happening in your life and your wife Margaret's life and so on. So tell us about the things that aren't in the book, because they're always intriguing. It's a sort of chance for us to find out about the director's cut of the novel, if you like.
Well, I worked with an editor called Minhinnick Craven, who doesn't get noticed or recognized in the book as an editor, but she should have been, because I did write something to say that Minhinnick edited this book, and our combined thoughts really were to cut out certain things, and one of the aspects that was cut out was Nia's mother, Sian Vine, her mental state, her mental illness, and there were lots of reports from actually another character in the book, Seren, who's a young woman who works in Extraordinaria, and she goes on Nia's behalf to see Sian and reports back for her, and those are cut out, maybe wisely, maybe not wisely, but the instructions were to cut the book down to about 50,000 words, so something had to go. I'm sure you know this problem, John. Some marvelous things have to go, so the mental illness bits of Nia were cast aside, but that doesn't mean they've gone. They can always.
You're going to be recycling those.
Yeah. Well, John, you never throw anything away if you're a writer. It's like a musician. You hope to tape things, and that will be used again. Of course, you don't chuck things away. You know that.
I was thinking of one editor I had who, when she gave me the manuscript back, it was a much flimsier thing than the thing I'd given her. Yes. And I said, there seems to be quite a lot missing here. And she said, I just took out that middle chapter. I said, what, the one about Mexico City, which was like 50,000 words? I said, yeah, it didn't work. Because I trusted her, I did sort of just say, because that is the thing about editors. Editors are invisible, and they're unheralded heroes and heroines of writing. And no matter how good and experienced you are, you're not always the best placed person to spot something that's wrong in a book or indulgent, So let's you can lift your glass of red wine to the editors of this world.
It's an anemone.
I mentioned at the start that this is a trilogy. Is it a trilogy? Is this over now? Because it seems to me that because of the way that you set up these characters, and you mentioned earlier campfire tales, and in a sense, there is a campfire in this book, and people do sit round and start to exchange their stories. But there is that driftingness that it's not as if you get to the end of the year and say, oh, that's the end of a 3-book series, because it could drift on to the next one, because at the moment we still have characters who've come to live in Porthcawl from Lithuania, and you think, oh, they're not going to be staying here much longer. The people from the Baltics, and obviously the fairground is going through a really good period at the moment. New rides, and those shishi ex-pubs are now putting on firework displays at 9 o'clock in the evening, like Disneyland. So there is that sense that you could write easily another one. Is there that temptation now to keep on exploring, because you've got these characters, they live for you in your head because you managed to make them live in ours?
Yes, you're tempted to keep them alive, to keep Nia alive, to see what happens to Nia in later life, to see what happens to her father, John Vine, who's the main character in the first novel, See Holly, and to see what happens to Parry, who is the main character in Limestone Man, because he dropped out completely from Nia, but he might not be dead, So I see it as an unfinishable project, and it would be silly to want to finish it because life doesn't finish. And who could have predicted how we are talking to each other now on Zoom,
Because one thing that I was thinking of when I was reading Nia, and particularly when you take people to Saskatoon and to New York and to Poland and Amsterdam and so on, you yourself have a really good track record in travel writing, and you've taken us to Iraq and all sorts of places in your writing, and I was thinking, so what happens to travel writing now? Because all of a sudden, if as a genre, I'm thinking, so what's going to happen to travel writing in the future?
Well, I don't know, because I'm not a travel writer, but if I was a travel writer, I'd be worried. But I will now travel, and I would advise everybody here who's looking in, these 8 or 9 people, use your imagination. When I travel again, I'm sure it might be with or propelled by my grandchildren, who want to explore themselves, but they will be exploring Wales, they'll be exploring the UK, and they'll be seeing more of that. And we will be encouraged to do that with them. I'm sure we will not be going abroad, but we'll be having marvelous times together in either Wales or the UK, and not getting on an aeroplane.
Because, in the same way that people now look at films and think, what do you mean people would all gather together in a cocktail bar or a pub, or, people with that social... There is that thing which we can now date from about 6 weeks ago, or if you're in Italy, 8 to 10 weeks ago, as being the past, and things changed. And all of a sudden, everything we read now seems a bit altered by this. Yeah. So even reading Nia, as I was yesterday, I was thinking, oh yeah, but that's not possible anymore. It's an extraordinary time, and writers who are meant to have sensitive antennae and understand what's going on, it is really hard now, isn't it? It's like...
They didn't predict it. Even, well, maybe people like John Wyndham, who I brought up earlier on, maybe he...
You're reading John Wyndham at the moment, aren't you? Rereading John Wyndham.
Excellent, yeah. But nobody that I'm aware of, that I've read, predicted it. But we've all got to deal with it. And face masks should be brought into everybody's writing now as not major themes, major memes, but asides. And the fact that we wear them is not a big deal, but they have to be there. But not that I wear one at all.
But at home?
At home, not at all. No.
Oh, sorry, I misheard.
I actually sell them.
Yeah.
I sell them in our shop.
Yeah, I know. This is like an advert.
Flour.
Yeah.
Flour and face masks are the new big sellers.
We mustn't carry down this line, because I remember when Chris Needs got told off in the BBC because live on air he was saying that people could come to his mother's shop in Aberavon where the bread was 2p cheaper than Asda. We mustn't go too far down. Far down that track. It does seem as if there are some good things that have happened already, though, and you, because of your environmentalism and all the rest of it, we are now appreciating local and doing things locally. There is now talk about ways in which the green economy can be a part of the immediate future when the world's post-capitalist economy finally tanks. No one needs oil at the moment. We're now seeing people actually paying people to store oil because no one actually wants oil, and there aren't any contrails over the sky overhead as I look up now. There's all of that. And also, even in a small way, within a few weeks, people in places like Cardiff, where I live, they're already thinking, oh God, we have to redesign the streets now to have streets which allow for pedestrians and cyclists and maybe the abiding dominance of the car. Its days are numbered.
Yes, indeed. Well, I totally agree with that, and I would hope that happens. I doubt that it will happen. There'll be a war for the drivers against the non-drivers, but hasn't there always been that war anyway?
How are you finding reading and writing now? I mean, you were saying that you reread novels. You're reading, and Amy Wack is saying, I haven't got the full thing. Is it How You Can Hear? Is it Birdsong, Amy? Because I haven't got the whole chat message coming up. Could anyone? I presume that the message was about, let me see. Yes, birds, yes. Well, Amy, I can tell you that the first thing I hear after the dawn chorus in the morning is a great spotted woodpecker hammering into a tree across the way in the park. And I'd never heard that before. So in this house, certainly.
Marvelous.
I think we've all become aware of birdsong. And I don't know about you, Robert, I don't know if you've seen it in Porthcawl, but the way that people are now putting chalk marks on pavements to mark up weeds and say what the names of the weeds are. Yeah, Ben Ray saying the air quality is so much better.
Yes, I know. Yeah, I was told about this yesterday by somebody who said we should all chalk down the names of shepherd's purse.
Yeah, and Amy Watt is saying there's an app you can get where you can actually hold your phone up and recognise it.
Oh dear.
I still prefer the old way. It's called Clapham, Tooting and Warburg, which is the flora of the British Isles. It's about that big. But there's a lovely thing that happens when you use that to identify plants, which is you learn that there's a name for every part of the plant and every kind of leaf, that some are oblate and spatulate and so on. So I like the ease with which you can recognise plants, but I still like the old ways.
Yeah, much better than having a smartphone. I don't have a smartphone, and I probably never will have a smartphone, but I actually might know the names of the weeds. They're not weeds to me, they're wildflowers.
Okay. So apologies to everybody, because I've only just worked out how to get all the little chat things coming up on the side here. So
Right.
I missed some of them. I'm sorry about that. We're sort of three quarters of an hour in now. Is this a good time to, because you've all been really quiet and attentive, like Trappist monks out there. Is this a good time for anyone to chip in who wants to speak rather than chat?
Yes.
Because this is a chance to be in Robert Minhinnick's study with him of a Tuesday evening, and he's having a glass of wine. So you can't imagine a circumstance more convivial than that.
No. Let's start up in the right-hand corner with Laura.
And I think Ben...
Laura, ask something intelligent.
I think Ben, are you wanting to say something? Is that?
I don't want to interrupt Laura, but I have a question.
Yeah, please.
Point.
Hey,
it's
Ben.
just about. Well, thanks for the great talk. It was just about. I mean, I really enjoyed your book, The Diary of the Last Man, or A Last Man, and that had a lot of, as well as poetry, it had a lot of musical form and a lot of lyricism and almost a prose play in there as well. And now this is your third novel in a trilogy. Do you find that different ideas you have are much suited? They express themselves better in different literary forms. So if you have a concept you want to convey or write about, will you try it in a poem and it works better in a novel, or maybe it suits a play better? Do you find they speak differently in these different forms? Because you seem to be very versatile in moving around these different types of creativity.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. I think it being me, I try them out in all three: in a poem, in a novel, or a short story, and experiment with them and see if it works. Sometimes I use all three, or I write all three. So, but that's not really approved of or wise. But I can repeat myself. That's why I write about sand all the time, in poetry and prose.
Okay. And Laura was going to speak, but then we sort of jumped to. Thanks, Ben.
I'm reading one of Robert's books at the moment, King Driftwood, which seems to be much more focused on longer poems, Robert. And whereas in other works, you seem to be more drawn to the kind of micro poetry and the kind of distillation, almost imagistic kind of style. And I was just wondering, in the poetry you're writing now, what are you more drawn to now?
Now, probably the imagistic shorter forms than the longer forms. You kind of tend to run out of puff a bit, energy, and the need to go on. So, and you want to draw the line more frequently up the page. So I'm probably writing more shorter material now.
Do you find, because as Ben suggested, and as I said right at the beginning, you write in different forms. Is there one thing that you actually say, well, this is what I am? Because for many people, you are a poet. As far as I'm concerned, the thing I've enjoyed out of your writing the most are the essays. That doesn't mean they're better. It's just that I happen to like that kind of prose. Which is the form that you couldn't live without, Robert?
Well, I'd have to say that's a poem. That's where I began writing as a songwriter when I was 14 or 15, and I wanted to write songs, and I had a guitar and couldn't master any chords whatsoever and had to give it up. But I wrote songs in my head. I still write poetry in my head a lot. I can write it if I'm walking over the dunes, or I'm in the allotment, or walking down the streets of Porthcawl or any other town. And I like doing that, and I think that will be the form that I give up last, and poetry will be the is the main thing, and that's what I give up. I would want to give up last. Not that I would ever give anything up properly.
Yeah, because but going back to the songs, I'd love to hear some of those songs that you composed when you couldn't play the guitar properly. But there is a sort of soundtrack in Nia, because you actually reference a lot of music. I mean, Iggy Pop, Iggy and the Stooges are there, and then the songs that you hear around the fairground and so on. You're obviously very alert to music as well as a form. And if Walter Pater was right, that all art aspires to the condition of music, then poetry does that, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. It does. And I really regret that I'm very unmusical, or I appreciate music, but I'm not musically trained via being able to play an instrument, or able to write via an instrument. I really do regret that. I think my life would have been different if I had been able to do that, but I've had to concentrate on the words, and what I tried to do, and the words have taken over. But music is really important to me, and in prose you're able to expand on people's lives and what moves your characters, and often what moves my characters, what moved Parry in Lamps of Man, what moved John Vine in Sea Holly, what moves the characters in Nia is music, and often the music that they hear themselves.
But when you read the dream sequence from Nia, that had its cadences, it had its musicality, it had other tricks of music, so repetition. If something is a mellifluous phrase, you repeat it later on. So in that sense, maybe you failed as a musician formally, but within your writing, you are creating music. You are aspiring to the condition of music.
Maybe I'm trying to do that, John. So thanks for pointing that out. But yeah, I try to do that, and that's why in the green room are very modest, small performance space that we have in the Sustainable Wales office. We allow people to play music, and musicians are very welcome, but as long as they play original stuff. Right. They don't do covers, as long as they're original.
You said there about the words sounding good. They read very well. Robert is, as we found out over the last hour, very good company. This is a strange experience, these lockdown conversations, but thanks for attending, and congratulations to Seren for actually managing to start off a series which will run for what, 10 days, is it?
Yes, yeah. 10 days. We up until Saturday, then we take Sunday off, and then every evening next week as well. So
okay, well,
a lot of work.
So thank you all for coming, and thanks for organising it. But thanks in the main to Robert Minhinnick for adding to a very fine library and ongoing exploration of Porthcawl and so many other things. And great to have spent just an hour in your company, Robert.